Hello, everybody, and thank you for tuning in to the Liberty Report. With us today is Daniel McAdams, our co-host. Daniel, good to see you this morning.
Good morning, Dr. Paul. How are you this morning?
Doing just quite well.
Good.
Ready and raring to solve another problem.
That's good news.
And try not to worry about the ones we don't solve.
Takes time.
The people need to have information. And of course, we spend a lot of time. We spend about 30 minutes on our program. But I know I do, and I know you must do it too. Maybe it doesn't take you as long.
No, it takes me longer.
Because we have to find the information. And as much as we fear the collapse of the internet, that they will punish people who don't cite the news as they want you to, we find that the internet, I think I use the internet a lot to get a piece of information.
Yeah.
And then after you get it, an answer to your question, then you have to decide, is it true or not?
Yeah.
So that takes a lot of information, and we have friends that we can trust more than others who are doing the same kind of studying.
Yeah.
And none of that would be in the New York Times or the Washington Post. But anyway, there's some news going on now. The markets were really, really shaky these last several days. They've calmed down today. And I've had people ask me, well, how much longer is this inflation going to last? Like in a month or two or three? I said, yeah, my belief, it's here to stay.
Wow.
And this mess that we have going on in Ukraine with Russia, it may not escalate and have some type of a temporary answer to, but it's sort of like figuring when would the Iraqi war end? When would the Afghan war end? And they have their ups and downs, and even when it ends, I'm never saying, "Oh, it ended, it's over. Let's have a victory."
Yeah.
So, but anyway, the things are going on, and we want to start off with talking about what was discovered and actually debated in a Senate hearing.
Senate hearing, yeah,
oh, boy.
yesterday.
And that is that. Victoria Nuland has admitted, and she's been around a bit. I think we remember her from 2014.
We do.
So they were talking in open, and she says, acknowledge that the U.S. and the Ukrainians have biolabs there. Does that mean that there might be a possibility of us having financed a lab in China or something like that? But anyway, that was a big deal, and that was an issue. But I found also the interesting, why does it come up? Well, the justification, I don't know whether she planned to do this, but it came out that we have to get control of this.
Yeah.
Like we're not involved. We need to get control because the Russians are coming. We don't want them to have any of these poison gases and these sorts of things. So that is one of the big arguments going on. But it's also an argument about false flags. If there is a release of gas and some people die, and that's. That the gases have been used, even though not, in tremendous amounts, but it's who released it, and they'll argue about that for years. So this is one going on, and the argument on our side, the U.S. side was, well, if the Russians do get this thing, they might use it for a false flag and then blame the Ukrainians.
Yeah.
But they acknowledge now if there's some gas released and some people die, it's automatic. Everybody knows it's Russia. So this is the argument that we have to protect the people by going in and keeping that gas out of the hands of the Russians. But I get to thinking, I think we've worked pretty closely with the Ukrainian governments and NATO. You'd think they would have something to say about it. But anyway, it's a mess. And one of the places where things could escalate, and maybe there will be a false flag, and they say, well, it may be committed by Russia, it may be committed by Ukraine. But then I got to thinking, they never mentioned the possibility that it could be somebody on our side that might do it.
We wouldn't do that, would we?
No, that's too conspiratorial.
Well, what a difference a day makes, Dr. Paul. On Monday, put this up. Bloomberg ran with this story. Put that first one up if you don't mind. China pushes conspiracy theory about U.S. labs in Ukraine. More about this later. And then the day later, Victoria Nuland, who, as we know, was behind the 2014 coup, appeared before the Senate. And Dr. Paul, I watched this testimony. She looks very nervous. She's always been very cocky and very self-assured.
Yeah.
She's from the Kagan neocon family, very full of themselves. This hearing, she looked very nervous. Let's watch the first clip from this. Here she is before the U.S. Senate when asked about these labs. I think we're going to run that whole first clip, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, the whole first clip. Let's listen to her.
Biological research, which in fact we are now quite concerned Russian forces may be seeking to gain control of. So we are working with the Ukrainians on how they can prevent any of those research materials from falling into the hands of Russian forces should they approach Ukraine. As
the poster said, she just confirmed every conspiracy theory about these labs. Let's play the first 40 seconds of the next one, because then she's questioned by Marco Rubio. And watch how nervous she is, and watch how strange her answer is to a simple question that could have been answered yes or no. First 40 seconds of this one. Make sure that
I only have a
volume
minute left. Let me ask you, does Ukraine have chemical or biological weapons?
Ukraine has biological research facilities, which in fact we are now quite concerned Russian forces may be seeking to gain control of. So we are working with the Ukrainians on how they can prevent any of those research materials from falling into the hands of Russian forces should they approach.
I'm sure you're aware that the...
Now, the thing is, we don't know what's in those, and we're not purporting to know. So before the fact checkers start whacking us, we are not saying that there are bioweapons. We're not saying anything. We don't know anything. All we know is that 2 days ago, if you even suggested that the U.S. had a relationship with Ukraine over these biolabs, you'd be fake news, you'd be canceled, and then a day later, a senior member of the U.S. government, of the State Department, admits essentially the same thing. So the question is why, and why she looks so nervous in her testimony.
You know, and I don't know when they'll get to the bottom of all that, but it's a mixed deal. You know, you say we can't even be sure of what we're listening to, whether it's true, and there's actually gases there. But I think that is, just makes it more for danger. I'm surprised that with this and other things, the correction occurred mainly because I think prices in gold and the stock markets all needed a correction. They overshot. But I would think that anything that we hear about this should make people more nervous.
Yeah, for sure.
This is not much reassurance, and it's sort of so casual. Yeah, we probably do that, but we don't want the Russians to have it like Russia doesn't know anything about this kind of thing.
Yeah. Well, you know what someone else posted on Twitter? Wouldn't it be ironic, especially after George W. Bush with the WMDs in Iraq, if the Russians went in there and actually found WMDs in Ukraine? But here's the other thing about this whole chapter, Dr. Paul, and it's fascinating. We don't know all the details about it. We only know that a very nervous Nuland was before the Senate. But let's put up that next clip. This is not an audio. This is USA Today. This tells you everything you need to know about the fact checkers, though. If we can put up that next one, fact check. Yeah, this is just the end of February. Fact check. False claim of U.S. biolabs in Ukraine is tied to Russian disinformation campaign. USA Today. Do the next one. This is PolitiFact, the Poynter Institute. They are supposedly the gold standard for fact-checking. They checked this tweet, Russia's targeting U.S. biological weapons labs in Ukraine. They say there are no U.S.-run biological labs in Ukraine, contrary to social media posts. So this shows you that the fact-checkers are not checking facts. What they are doing is backing up the U.S. government narrative. And one final clip on this, Dr. Paul, because Nuland herself essentially admits that the U.S. government is pressuring social media groups and fact checkers, you could assume as well, to make sure that everyone adheres to the accepted U.S. narrative. Let's play the first 24 seconds of that last audio or video clip, and you'll want to hear what she says to this, Dr. Paul. Very fascinating. I know I'm asking our poor guy in the back that works so madly.
Up and supported, works 24/7 with other allies and partners, not just in Europe but around the world, to bring to light Russian disinformation campaigns and who is pushing them. We also work with the tech companies to try to take down false stories, and we are working very assiduously on all of that now. We're also working to try to get truth into Russia in the context of a complete freeze on independent news.
So she says, quote, "We also work with the tech companies to try to take down false stories, and we're working very assiduously." Well, the false story of yesterday about these labs is now the true story in her own words today.
See, they always have their psychological loophole on this. She says, the United States does not have it. But it may be our money, it may be our technicians, but technically they say, oh, that's the Ukrainians have that. That's not us. We don't have the lab. That was the same thing like Wuhan. I don't think they've ever even as hard as Rand has tried to get to the bottom of that. We don't know exactly, who did what when, because it was American money. And here, this whole idea that we're not going to put troops in there. We do everything else. We pay for all these weapons and send it in, and we know what's going on with these labs. And then the media comes along and says, oh no, that fax is wrong. Yeah. There's no facilities there.
You're canceled.
Yeah, that's it. So it's back to the old story, of seeking out the truth. But I don't think we're going, we're sorting things out. We're not going to be capable of revealing the truth.
No.
And that's why I resort to saying, well, what is the solution then? Yeah. Avoid these situations. Don't get involved. Don't get into an entangling alliance, and don't do this. And don't have an industry that's livelihood depends on. That's what happened in the medical thing with COVID.
Yeah.
It was the people who were making money.
Oh,
They wouldn't say the medical profession made all those mistakes, even though they're admitting the medical profession, the people had the biggest bull, the pulpit, and they went ahead and they got away with this by just lying through their teeth, and it's just so often how often we bring up, the war against COVID and the war going on against Russia.
It's amazing, It's an info war.
So many similarities.
But isn't it amazing to hear her confirm what you say all along, which is the U.S. government is conspiring with social media companies to prevent any voices from being heard who run counter to the narrative. I mean, she admits it.
I know, and that is so sinister. That is, you can't say fascism because you can't. Well, you really get censored by saying something. But that is very close to the truth. But I think the more, if you make an attempt to make it sound as upfront as possible, it's fascistic. It leans toward fascism, but it certainly could be called corporatism. And the special interest in that the military and industrial complex has so much control. And why are we so involved? And of course, the real motive, the big picture, is the people who get to participate in the looting in the empire. Who controls things in the empire, and those are the financial people and the military people and the arms manufacturers. Now the control of medicine.
Pharmaceuticals.
Daniel, there's good news ahead. It's all bankrupt, and it's going to go down.
It is.
So we better work hard to get more people saying liberty is the answer.
Yeah. Well, we've had a lot of stupid and evil secretaries of state, and let's just be blunt. Pompeo comes to mind, a few others. But I don't know if we've had any as hapless as bungling Blinken. I mean, this man is way out of his league. And I'm just going to quickly do a refresh on an amazing chapter of bungled U.S. policy over the last couple of days. And it's going to be rapid fire, Dr. Paul. Put up that next clip. And this is all in the course of a few days. This is back a few days ago. This is on the 6th. Blinken says Poland sending fighter jets to Ukraine, gets a green light from the U.S., and then you go to the next one. And so this is his first one. Green light, Poland, send your jets. And then he's tried to sweeten the pot, Dr. Paul. Here's Blinken. We are looking actively now at the question of airplanes that Poland may provide to Ukraine and looking at how we may be able to backfill should Poland decide to supply those planes. That's Blinken. So Poland got that message. Send your MiGs, and we're going to give you F-16s in exchange. Now put the next one on. So here's what's Poland's response after they were given this offer. Major development. This is yesterday. Poland says it will hand over all of its MiG-29 jets immediately and free of charge. But the jets are to be turned over to the U.S., and that's to Ramstein Air Base in Germany, for U.S. delivery to Ukraine. So the Poles called their bluff. You have to understand Slavic humor, I think. And then when that happened, so Blinken says, hey, if you send some planes, we're going to give you some new ones, some F-16s, some really good ones. Poland says, okay, you can have them all. And then the next one is when the U.S. realizes what has happened. There's absolute panic, and Nuland was asked about this, and she was in panic. And here's from our good friends at Zero Hedge, some sharp words and a swift rejection from the Pentagon Tuesday evening last night. The prospect of fighter jets at the disposal of the government of the United States departing from a U.S. NATO base in Germany to fly into airspace that is contested with Russia over Ukraine raises serious concerns for the entire alliance. That's John Kirby of the Pentagon. They went into panic mode when Poland accepted the offer.
Just think of how much activities going on over the MiGs, and in my mind, if this is not a scientific point. I've gotten to the point where I thought MiGs were sort of World War II stuff. They've been around in Korea, that kind of stuff. So anyway, here they are. The United States is involved in this. Obviously, they can't, stand aside from this. Ukraine is involved. Poland is involved, and they're talking about MiGs. Well, I thought the MiGs belonged to the Russians, and it may be that. Nobody else really wants them. We'll replace them and this sort of thing. And but I find it sort of ironic that all these people are divvying up and how we're going to do this and how we're going to support the enemy of Russia by taking these MiGs and lying to people, and then get people, fact finders, that come and try to say, this is the way it really is. And it is. It's really probably good news in a way because it's so inept.
Yeah, it's really bad.
And that's why it's terrible that this is going on, but they're so inept that you can't say, well, NATO, they're on the upswing. They're going to conquer the world next week. Most people say, how long is NATO going to last? Yeah. And we can't pretend. When are they going to get Nuland up there and says, my main purpose here, let me tell you, is to protect the empire. Yeah. That's our job, and we work hand in glove with the military-industrial complex. I don't think that's going to happen anytime soon, but that's really where the problem is, which means back to why we exist, and that is the Institute for Peace and Prosperity, is that's our goal. Yeah. And this is a mess, but if it self-destructs, it doesn't build the power of the empire, the empire. But then, if history pans out the way it usually does, somebody else is going to grab the empire. Maybe that's what they're doing now, is arguing, maybe the empire will be controlled by Russia and China together, and throw in India to give them a few troops or something like that. Yeah. So it seems like that's gone on for a long time. And there's no reason why they can't have a thought process where that includes, a world that comes together on the opposite terms of peace and nonviolence. Yeah. Because it happens in different areas around the world for centuries that people did get along, Yeah. But there's a rare talk about that.
Well, the funny thing about this is, the U.S. wanted Poland to launch jets from Polish territory to attack Russians in Ukraine. The Poles said, hang on a minute, that doesn't sound like a great idea, because the Russians have already said if you do that, you're going to get bombed. And so it's kind of like if you're in a bar with a friend of yours and there's a big tough guy over at the bar chugging beer, a real bodybuilder, and your friend says, hey, go punch him, go ahead, go punch him. You know, that's essentially what the U.S. was doing. And the Germans also recognized the absurdity of sending fighter jets from German soil to kill Russians in the former Soviet Union, i.e. Ukraine. And here is the German chancellor yesterday. He said, we provided all kinds of defense materials and have sent weapons that we've told you, if we can put that next one up actually, that clip, and we have sent weapons we told you about, but it is also true that we have to consider very carefully what we do concretely and definitively, and warplanes are not a part of that. So he realizes, you know, Americans don't really have a grasp of history, I don't think, and maybe Blinken has forgotten just a few decades ago when German soldiers and planes and troops went into the Soviet Union. He doesn't want a repeat of this history.
You know, one of the things I've suggested over the years, it hasn't gained a lot of traction, but I think what we as a nation should do, you can't say, well, you can't have a business that might make a weapon that can defend your country if somebody attacks you. But it shouldn't be owned by the corporations. The corporations manufactures the weapons with taxpayers' money, and then if there's a sale of weaponry, whether it's the airplanes or whatever, and they sell it to the various countries to maintain the empire, and a lot of profits are made, then they say, what we have to do now is change that. I don't think the business should do it without absolute clear-cut permission from the government, you know, that weaponry can be sold. But what's happened, Daniel, why this isn't practical, is big business and big government, just like what we talk about social media.
Yeah.
They're in bed together. They're partners in this, and therefore, but ownership and private property could solve this to a degree. But the military-industrial complex, the big business, been known for a long time. I didn't want to believe it when I heard stories about World War I, of how some of the fascists grew to power, but I sort of think it probably was true.
Yeah. Well, here's another. Our next topic is one that I know you focus on a lot, and I think it's really important. And some news came out yesterday that we found disgusting about the January 6th. And this is a famous one from that. We can put up that next clip if you can. This is Richard Big O Bartlett. Here he is. Very famous photo. He went in to the Capitol and he was not supposed to. He went into Nancy Pelosi's office, and Dr. Paul, he violated the sanctuary, the sacred space of Nancy Pelosi. He put his dirty proletarian feet on her desk. And for that, the Department of quote-unquote justice is offering him a plea bargain for putting his feet on her desk. 70 to 87 months in prison. He's a 61-year-old man. He's facing up to 70. Take this. Here's a good deal, guy. 87 months in prison. Crazy.
Yeah, it's a tragedy is also what it is. And that to me means that the antagonism is going to build. I can see the Democrats panicking right now because they have been in charge and they have gotten away with a lot.
Yeah.
You know, the Department of Justice, as far as I'm concerned, really doesn't exist. And that's a bit overstated because there are some people who have come up, just like the judicial system and the judges are basically, you know, so messed up and the hand of the politicians. But there are some good judges and there's been some good rulings.
Yeah.
The trouble is sorting all this out. But this thing, the Democrats know what's coming, and they know they're going to lose power. And power is the name of the game up there. And it's already been talked about, you know, all the people that were falsely arrested and pseudo-arrested will and are in prison without due process of law, that they would get amnesty, they would get off, and they would be excused. They haven't even gotten their day in court.
Yeah.
So the Democrats, I can see them panicking. Let's get everybody we can get right now, and even if we don't get them behind bars, we're going to set an example. This is. I wonder wonder where this goes next. There has to be an appeal or something on this.
Well, he said he said, I'm not going to take the plea bargain. I'm going to go to trial. So let's go to trial.
Yeah.
So, which is a smart thing. I mean,
Yeah.
hopefully,
yeah.
I mean, the track record is not great. But the question is, and I think that's a great point, Dr. Paul, that maybe the Democrats are panicking and they want to run these through quickly. But the big question that we would have would be, the Republicans have the guts, if they do take over, to defend some of these people that were so unjustly accused.
Yeah, that's something. We need one of these fact checker to find out.
There are some
But-
radicals in the party, though, that I think are, maybe not our taste, across the board, but there have been some people that have spoken up for these
Yeah,
guys.
and it's always at great risk, for them now, and so much has happened that the judicial system really is a big concern, and the judicial system is all messed up, but also the collusion of the media and government is a big deal as well. Well, it's all, anytime they get mixed up with big government. So ultimately, the big correction for this is not thinking you can get a few good people into government and clean up the mess. It is shrinking the concept of government. And that's what the founders did. If people would have followed very strictly what was permitted, in the federal government, there'd be everything that's happened in the 20th century probably couldn't have happened. They wouldn't have had the printing press to just print the money and pay the bill and steal from the people. So it's a sad story. But I still think that the only option we have is trying to offer up an alternative, and they've heard about our alternative. It's opposite of what we're putting up with in our court system and our economic system and our foreign policy.
Well, you talk a lot about the Department of Justice, Department of Injustice, but here we have this guy, feet on the desk, facing many years in prison. But let's remember back to the summer of 2021 and put on that next clip. Remember this, guys? There's two different kinds of justice in the U.S. If you're politically unpopular, you go to jail for years. But here's a politically popular one. This is from The Sun back in June 20th, 2021. Escaping justice. Hundreds of BLM rioters, looters, and vandals have their charges dropped despite destruction from violent protests. And we remember those protests very well. They all get their charges dropped because they were favored by the elites. Poor old Barnett isn't the slammer.
That sounds weird, terrible, evil, but it's logical and expected from people who believe in collectivism and Marxism.
Yeah.
And that is, they're doing exactly what you want them to do because they want the chaos in the streets, and that's what we said. They're getting their chaos, and look at the homelessness and all these things because all the reaction and what they were doing with enforcement of the COVID business. I mean, it made no sense at all. It even was destructive to businesses and everything. But the chaos they got, and that's what this is. They want to get us upset, but they can upset us. But what we have to do is think about the most positive thing we can do to convert people to understanding why it's wrong. Why there's something terribly wrong about what's happening. And this whole thing that they say that one group gets off and the other one will be punished, and yet, for them, that's what they want to do.
That's what they want. You're right. That's a good point. That's a good point. Well, the last one I know is another one that you've been interested in a lot, and let's put it up here if we can. This is out of Florida. I'm going to throw it over to you, Dr. Paul, but this happened yesterday. If we can put that last clip, the second to last clip on with Florida governor. Florida to allow doctors to use off-label drugs for early treatment of COVID-19.
Well, my first reaction to this was, isn't it tragic that this has to be an event, that they've all of a sudden allowed doctors permission to practice medicine, which basically was understood. This debate and discussion didn't come up when I was in medical school. They didn't say, well, you have to be really, really very careful. Even if you found a drug and you found out that it helps somebody that does such and such, you can't, you did it. You did it, and you did it with, an understanding with the patients, and the FDA wasn't the authority that tells you when you can do it. But here it is. They come along and they do this, and now fortunately, they're moving in the right direction. I'm not downplaying that. Allow the doctors to use off-label drugs. That's how progress is made. And, you know, it's the kind of thing that should be decided by the doctor-patient relationship. But instead, the worst thing, the disintegration of that principle in the last 2 to 3 years has just been a disaster.
Yeah.
Where if you even, not even if you didn't even use ivermectin, if you talk about it,
Yeah.
and especially if you're a PhD in physics and in chemistry and you talk about it, you get punished because you're misinforming the people. So to me, the tragedy here is that this is news that they're returning it. And so we should be grateful and bow to the king and say, thank you for allowing me to take a breath, you know, and practice medicine. And besides it hurts the progress of medicine too. Yeah. And they were so, you know, for years and years, it's improved a little bit about, you know, they're drugs that are being tested and they recognize they've been unproven, and there was a law passed that you could work it out and get some of those drugs and I'll be allowed to do it. The system I'm talking about would move much more rapidly.
Yeah.
The point is, two people have to have an agreement and understand they cannot be deceived, and then you will see progress much faster, and that would be the using medication in this manner instead of saying what a great government you are when we give you back a little bit of your freedom. But it's not a surprise, I guess, that this is in Florida where there's a governor that wants to move it in the right direction, and that's what this does.
Yeah, exactly. So a little bit of mixed good news. Well, I'm going to close out, I think, if you don't mind. And this is a chart. We love charts. This chart really confirms what we've said in the show since the Russia-Ukraine thing happened, which is that just like with COVID, it doesn't mean COVID doesn't exist. It doesn't mean Russia didn't attack Ukraine. But the comment is on the reaction to it. And I think we've predicted, and it's not a surprise, that Biden is hiding behind this Russian invasion to hide a lot of his economic errors. And here, I sent this to you yesterday, suggesting we put it up. Here's what Biden said yesterday. Putin's war is already hurting American families at the gas pump. I'm going to do everything I can to minimize Putin's price hike here at home. So it's all Putin's fault. We're paying higher gas prices as well. Here's a fantastic and fascinating chart. Confirms how he's not being honest, Dr. Paul. I know that's a shocker. Just put up that chart. Biden, you're not telling the truth. Come on. Here we go. Last chart. Uh-oh. You have gas prices almost vertical. And then at the very end, you see the timeline of where Russia invaded Ukraine. But that whole thing, of course, is Putin's fault. It's not the fault of shutting down the pipelines and shutting off trade with Venezuela and Iran, et cetera, et cetera.
Isn't it amazing that stuff gets by and people don't, you know, put their foot down and say, why don't we wake up? There's more of it, though, in this combi, because one thing about gasoline, it's sort of universal. You know, there's a few people who don't care. They'd pay $20 a gallon and they have the money to do it. But for the most part, you know, average people, I understand there's a lot of people consider themselves average and they have to make $100,000 a year. Yeah. Well, food prices and fuel prices going up is really going to hurt. So that's where we are today on this. And the answer I gave to the individual, when's this going to stop? Not soon. It's going to last. In the 70s, we waited and waited. It really took about 10 years in Paul Volcker before he could correct it by giving us a recession. That always bugs me too. But the answer to anything excessive, like too much activity, will have a recession. And I thought, well, how about freedom? That's way too aggressive.
That's radical.
Now, I just want to reiterate a couple rules that I try to follow and try to spread the issue. And that is, so much of this, whether it's COVID or whether it's the Russians or whether it's Ukraine or whether it's our problems here at home, is that things ought to be worked out on an individual basis. We quite frequently do it. Things should be voluntary. You know, two people should agree to things, and it should be their business. So that means there's license to practice what you want. if you don't hurt people, and therefore, a sexual life, a religious life, an economic life, you get to spend your own money. And it's just a shame that people say, hey, that sounds pretty good, and why don't we have a voluntary society? It's because we've allowed some other people who don't like the voluntary society and they like the authoritarian society, and they sort of have a goal of empire, and that's where the real problems come. Internationally, it's been talked about, and it's been talked about, I'm sure, for hundreds of years, but certainly Woodrow Wilson talked about self-determination. And even for the division of Europe after World War II, they talked about self-determination. Self-determination, allowing the people to have an honest referendum, could do a whole lot. And I happen to think it'd be nice if the United States participated in self-determination, and there has to be maybe some rules about how to do it. But I would think the Ukraine would be a perfect example of, and they did do that in election, and there has been, and right now there is a division that in eastern Ukraine, there's a lot of Russians live there, and they'd like to go with the Russians. There's a lot of Europeans live west, and they'd like to identify with the European. But why don't they get, why don't we allow this self-determination? It's because there's too many outsiders. Just think wonder what really would happen if we had no outsider involved in Ukraine. NATO, go on home. America, go on home. Russians, go on home. And sit down there and let that whole group figure it out. It would probably be, maybe there'd be 3 or 4 factions, and it wouldn't be quite so threatening, because all of a sudden, when people don't get their way, what do? Resort to first? Violence. And that's what we're witnessing now, violence to have their way. So looking ahead, I would say that problems are bad and they're tough. If we look at them as an advantage to bring about the ideas and the benefits of policy of peace and prosperity, I think there's no reason why we have to be pessimists. We should be concerned. We should be work at it. But ideas do have consequences, and right now there's probably too many bad ideas out there, and I think ideologically is what drove the founders to take on a very powerful nation and be able to establish at least an effort to come about with a society that operated with the principles of voluntarism. I want to thank everybody for tuning in today to the Liberty Report. Please come back soon.